Welcome to episode 1 of Beyond the Crease, a Grassroots Cricket original podcast. I'm Behram Kazi, and with me I have today Mr. Ali Khan, the cricket prof on Twitter, and he is the former general manager of the Jamaica Talawas. How are you doing, Ali?
I'm doing good, Behram. It's good to finally get this going.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on as a guest, and thank you so much for taking out the time. The topic for today, of course, is how Pakistan's cricket board, the PCB, is governed and how it's intertwined with Pakistan's own government. And you know how there was a lot of talk when Imran Khan was deposed, and people were guessing that Ramiz Raja might be removed as the chairman. Of course, there were a lot of rumors that he has been sacked, but he wasn't, and he's still carrying on. But basically, why this happens is because the patron in chief of the Pakistan Cricket Board is the sitting Prime Minister of Pakistan. So, what's your take on that, Ali?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I think corporate governance is really important. If you look at the best organizations in the world, good corporate governance is tantamount. And in Pakistan and really in cricket boards around the world, but specifically in Pakistan, what we see is politics is completely intertwined with the state of the cricket board, where every time there's a change in government, whether it's a democratic government, whether it's a martial law, the president, the chief martial law administrator, the prime minister, that person somehow is then responsible for appointing the chairman of the cricket board. And every time that that happens, it completely changes the direction of the cricket board. And that's problematic, right? Because number one, that person isn't necessarily elected. And number two, that person is, more times than not again, it's handpicked by the prime minister or the person in power. And so that person is generally a sycophant, right? That person is an extension of that person. And that's not necessarily a good thing because there's a kind of this destruction of merit, right? So the chairman of a cricket board is not necessarily the most qualified person, or the CEO of the cricket board is more times than not necessarily a qualified person. And what we see now is, we have 3.5 years of Imran Khan's government. We had Ahsan Mani as a chairman. We had Wasim Khan as a CEO. And we had this kind of consistency in thought, in strategy, in approach. And then suddenly, we have a change in government. And although Ramiz Raja is still the chairman of the Pakistan Cricket Board, there is this kind of, axe hanging that at any point in time he can be changed. And we've seen recent things such as the Pakistan Junior League or other ideas come to the forefront. And will those ideas continue? We don't know. But when a new chairman comes in, or if a new chairman comes in, things like that can go away. We can talk about the merits of the idea. And then the last thing is just the idea that the chairman can change just because the government changed, right? There's a lot of, I don't want to get into the politics, but there's a lot of controversy on how the recent government was changed, right? And so that in itself, the fact that politics is intertwined with the governance of the cricket board is extremely problematic. And it shouldn't happen, right? It shouldn't happen. We've seen what's happened with the Pakistan Football Federation, how interlinked it is with the government of Pakistan, and how, just from a governance perspective, how it was condemned by FIFA. Obviously, the PCB is not in that situation because there's a lot of there are some really good people that work within the Pakistan Cricket Board. But the fact that, again, that churn, that change can potentially happen at any given point, it is problematic. How do you perceive it? Because, like, for me, it's not something I agree with, but I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Well, I do believe that the Prime Minister should not be the patron in chief of the PCB, and it should be mutually exclusive, the government and the cricket board. And the cricket board should exist as an independent body, which should have its own elections, and someone should be voted in. So, in an ideal world, I'd say that's how it should happen, but we don't live in an ideal world.
Right.
And it does seem like Ramiz Raja will stick around because I do think that had Shehbaz Sharif, the new Prime Minister of Pakistan, wanted to sack Ramiz, he would have had done it already. And
Mm,
since Ramiz is still in the job and inaugurating new projects such as the Junior Premier League, which I particularly am very excited about, I think that he might stick around. But that's besides the point. I do not agree with the structure and the way the governance takes place at the board, and I don't think very many people will agree with that. But you have a seemingly competent person at the helm right now. That definitely does excite me. Coming to Ramiz, there's a lot of talk, or there has been a lot of talk regarding who should be the PCB chairman. Some
mm,
people are of the opinion that it should be an ex cricketer. Now, we've seen both sides of that coin. You see Ramiz Raja doing a decent job, but we've also seen Ijaz Butt. And a good cricketer may not necessarily make a good administrator, which is basically the debate. So, there are pros and cons of having an ex cricketer as chairman. I'd like you to shed some light on that.
Yeah, before I answer that question, I just want to go back, where does the fault lie, right?
Mhm.
So, when you talk about, the way that the corporate governance structure exists in Pakistan cricket, obviously that's been part of the history of Pakistan, for as long as I can remember. And I don't blame the previous governments for maintaining that status quo. I do blame the previous government for maintaining the status quo because I think the former Prime Minister Imran Khan should have known better. I always give this example. If Imran Khan, obviously a very successful captain, one of the greatest cricketers of all time, a really good administrator, right? If you look at building a hospital from nothing, and that hospital has flourished now for almost 30 years and beyond, and obviously he's a big part of that. Building a political party, not easy to do, right? Not easy to do in Pakistan. So building an institution is really hard, right? And the fact that Imran Khan didn't realize that there needs to be a change in the corporate governance structure within the PCB is troubling to me because if there was someone that should have known better, it was him. And the fact that he didn't, and that he put in place people that obviously probably were closer to him, like Ramiz, like Hassan Mai, not to say that those individuals weren't qualified or aren't qualified. It is to say, though, that he should have broken that status quo, right? And he should have said that there needs to be a different structure. Even though I've been a former cricketer, even though I have ideas that I want to share, that I may even want to implement, I shouldn't be the patron in chief because there's a sense that there is no kind of succession planning, right? And we see this in organizations across the world. But in Pakistan, it's probably the form of success. Succession planning is the worst because there's a dynastic element to succession planning. And so Imran Khan should have realized that I am not forever. Even if Imran Khan was the best patron in chief that Pakistan cricket ever had, right? And amazing things were happening in Pakistan cricket. The reality is that he was not going to be the prime minister of Pakistan forever. And, lo and behold, in the middle of his term, he is no longer the prime minister, right? And so he should have prepared for that. And the way to prepare for that was to eliminate this. And I think it would have created a lot of goodwill amongst the cricket community, amongst even from a governance perspective, just from a political governance perspective, hey, this person is limiting his power. This person is devolving power to other people. And that is what is sustainable, right? Because one person is not forever, even if they are very good at what they do. And obviously we have, I have criticisms of things that happened during his tenure as patron in chief. But I think that would be my biggest criticism, the fact that he didn't do that and he thought that he needed to be at the helm to implement decisions through the chairman, through the CEO during his tenure. And now we're kind of back to square one in terms of at any given point, as I said earlier, not to belabor the point, at any given point, that means that it can be changed, whether you like him as a chairman or not. And that is, in my opinion, very problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke about how, there's some talk around having an ex cricketer as the chairman, but having an ex cricketer as the patron in chief, that is
Mm,
something that Pakistan probably is not going to experience. So, yes,
mm,
I happen to agree with you over there that Imran Khan should have known better in that sense that if you're at the helm, if you have all of those cards and you call the shots, then maybe something in terms of succession and how to take cricket forward, he could have implemented some changes with respect to that. But that was not to be. And honestly, it's something that's never been changed from the dawn of Pakistan cricket. So I don't see it happening either. And that is a bit disappointing.
yep,
And it's just the fact that on any given day, your chairman can be sacked in the way
right,
things are run, regardless of what contracts have been signed. They can just
right.
be moot.
And just on that point, what is the solution? Well, the solution would be to untether the PCB from the Ministry of Sports, from the government. And the way that the PCB should be run is maybe there should be an honorary chairman. And I think one of the things that Imran Khan did get right, or the previous government did get right, was Ahsan Mani was essentially an honorary chairman. He had his own vision, he had his own ideas, but essentially Wasim Khan was the CEO and he was running the cricket board on a day-to-day basis. Again, irrespective of whether you agree with a lot of things that he did or didn't do, the fact is that he was a professional, he was a CEO, and no one could deny that he was well credentialed to do that job. And what should have happened though is that the chairman of the cricket board or the CEO should be appointed by the cricket associations, right? And what we've seen is the corporate governance structure around the cricket associations in Pakistan has actually improved, right? Whether it's Sindh Cricket, whether it's Southern Punjab, the people that are running these organizations, again, you can disagree with some of the things that are happening, but they generally seem to be a lot better than the people that used to run, these organizations. And those are the people that should be then responsible for deciding who the chairman is. And under that chairman should be a professional CEO, like you would have a professional CEO of Pepsi or any other kind of multinational organization. I don't want to kind of bring in the way that corporations in Pakistan are run, but definitely multinational organizations have, really good organizational structures. When you talk about, the best companies in the world, whether it's Google, Microsoft, Amazon, etc. So that's kind of my kind of periphery, high level kind of opinion on that. Not to say it's the right opinion, but I definitely do not think that the prime minister, the president, or whoever is running the country should have anything to do with cricket.
Absolutely. And your take on having an ex cricketer at the helm as PCB chairman, what about that? Because I stated earlier, you've got both of those sides visible in front of you. You've got Ramiz Raja, who people have faith in, seems to be doing a decent job, and there's a lot of expectation. And then you have Ijaz Butt, who played a bit of international cricket for Pakistan, a few games, and literally dragged Pakistan cricket in the mud, one of the most tumultuous periods that Pakistan cricket has faced in its history. Of course, the spot fixing scandal, it marked the end of his
Right,
tenure
right.
as well. So, yeah, do you think it's beneficial maybe to have a cricketer as the chairman, but then essentially have a CEO working with that chairman and someone who has a bit of administrative nous?
Yeah, I think, I wouldn't kind of conflate the two in that you can be a cricketer and also be a good administrator, but you can be a cricketer and you can be a terrible administrator, right? And so, what we've seen over the course of Pakistan cricket's history is that a lot of former players have been in administrative roles. Former players are in the cricket committee, and some of those former players continue to make poor decisions on who the head coaches should be, for example. These are former cricketers, right? They should know better, but apparently they don't. We've seen former cricketers as chairman. As you said, Ijaz Butt is a great example of someone who's very, very bad at his job. And there are a lot of reasons for that, right? And so the idea that you have to be a former cricketer to be a chairman or a CEO or a head coach is just that that's not the way the world is working now. You should be, a qualified individual can come from anywhere, right? So, for example, again, the chairman of, whoever is heading Procter and Gamble in Pakistan, for example, that person can easily be qualified to run the PCB, right? Because running an organization is far more than cricket. I think one of the things that happens in Pakistan a lot is the chairman of the cricket board wants to make cricket decisions, right? The chairman of the cricket board wants to decide who's going to be the opening pair in Test cricket. That is problematic. And so, regardless of whether that person is a former cricketer or is a cricketer, right? I do not think that that person should get involved in. Again, it goes back to kind of limiting your power, right? Devolution of power. There is this mistrust. The job of executives, the job of chairmen is to put in the best process in place to hire the right people and then trust those people to do their jobs. And that doesn't happen in Pakistan. Not only is there no process, there is no process to hire the right people. And then those people are then not trusted to do their jobs, right? Because everybody wants to micromanage everything. And one of the reasons for that is that there's this fear that I can be fired at any moment. There's this fear that the government can change at any moment, right? And so people want to make sure that their fate is in their own hands. And again, that's just not the right way to kind of run an organization. So I don't have a belief either way. I think a cricketer could potentially be a good administrator, although that's never been proven. And a non-cricketer can both be a good administrator, but they can also be a bad administrator, right? If their intentions are not, good, or if they're not qualified to do the job. And so, it's unfortunate that, in Pakistan, there are some really, really qualified people, but unfortunately, those people, don't necessarily make it to the top. At the same time, there are certain, I would say, executives within Pakistan cricket that are really good. If you look at, let's move away from the chairman. If you look at, Salman Nasir, who's the COO of the PCB, he's done a tremendous job in his role as first as a general counsel, now as COO, in running the PSL. The way that the PSL was run this year is really a triumph. I believe as the director of the PSL, the fact that it was held in Pakistan, the fact that, it was held under COVID, the fact that the PSL is a profitable organization. Salman Nasir has probably been through a lot of that, right? In his role. He's been there longer than a lot of these chairmen. So that's not to say that there aren't good people. That's not to say that a chairman can't hire good people, because I believe Salman came into, the PCB far before obviously Ramiz, far before Hassan Mani. But yeah, at the top level, and he's a non-cricketer, right? So, he has a legal background. So I think there's no one way to kind of skin the cat. The best way is to have good organizational structure, to have good foundation, and then build processes around that, right? So you are hiring the right people. If someone were to ask me who's proven himself to be a better coach for Pakistan, Mickey Arthur or Saklan Mushtaq, I would probably say Saklan Mushtaq has proven to be a much better coach, even though no one never thought that Saklan would be the head coach of Pakistan cricket, right? So, I think again, there's no one way to do it. I wouldn't say that it should be a cricketer or it shouldn't be a cricketer, but the history of cricketers being in these important positions, Javad Mina is another example, is not very good.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at history, you'll find all sorts of examples, and there will be some good eggs in there, and some people who just basically could not do their job. And I agree with you. Like, a good cricketer or a cricketer, period, can make a good administrator, but it's no guarantee. It's very likely that they aren't good administrators. And maybe, perhaps if I look at the pros of having someone like Ramiz Raja as the chairman, is that a good cricket visionary can do a lot for Pakistan cricket, especially someone like Ramiz who can bring in a lot of corporate sponsorship as well, which we've seen with the Junior Premier League. He's got Engro and BRB Group, and then he's going to finance the education and living and pretty much everything for these 100 kids who are going to play the Junior Premier League later on after pathway cricket and earn around 15 to 20 grand in
Yeah.
15 days, which really could change the face of Pakistan cricket. So in that regard, having someone, a cricketer, a former cricketer, as a visionary up at the top, I think definitely adds a lot of value. But then, of course, you stressed upon organizational structure. And definitely, I agree with you over there. You need someone to do the execution bit.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a role that the CEO could very much fulfill. And also, just the fact that, one man with too much power, I've never really seen that work anywhere across organizations. I feel like there should be a balance of power and some sort of hierarchy to kind of even things out. And that also creates checks and balances. So I think maybe that might be the best way forward. If you have someone and former cricketer as a visionary who gets to,
Right.
come up with ideas, helps with the sponsorship, and then you have a CEO or some person who helps with the execution and organizational structure, the hiring and firing of people, and basically making sure that everything runs properly as a team.
I think what we have to ask is we have to ask the question, what is a good administrator, right? What are the qualities of a good administrator? What is the job description of a CEO? What is the job description of a chairman? You mentioned that Ramiz Raja has done a wonderful job, A, bringing the junior league into fruition. And then number two, he's gotten sponsors for it, right? Do you think that Ijaz Butt would be able to do that? Ramiz has a technical background, right? He's well educated. I believe he has an MBA, and he has these connections with the private sector. A lot of chairmen or a lot of former players won't have that, right? A lot of former players won't be able to sit in a meeting with CEO or this chief marketing officer of Engro and have that conversation, right? And be able to sell. A lot of them won't have those skills. And so the fact that Ramiz is doing all these things is a good thing, but it's also problematic because the job that he's doing is the job that a chief marketing officer should be doing, right? That person should be capable enough to do it. The fact that he, as a chairman, is fulfilling all these different roles is problematic because, again, Ramiz is not going to be around forever, right? Again, government can change or anything can happen. Ramiz can decide to, go back to commentary. Then what? What process do you have in place to replace him? Let's say he is the best chairman, right? Is there someone who can fulfill all these different roles? And the idea is no, that's why you should have or director of commercial, a chief marketing officer who is elite, who can actually do that job rather than a chairman having to come in and micromanaging, the hiring of a coach, micromanaging chief selector, all those things, and so one way it's a good thing because things are getting done. In another way, it's not a good thing because it's not sustainable.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head over there when you talked about the separation of duties or the importance of having that separation of duties and roles. So, with respect to the governance style and hierarchy of the PCB, I think that's one major flaw. And it does exact a lot of power to one person. And yeah, that doesn't always prove to be fruitful. That's what history has proven. I do trust Rameez to do a good job, but I think you're absolutely right when you say that that is the job of a chief marketing officer. And if you don't have these roles, once Rameez or whoever XYZ who is doing a good job or doing their job a certain way leaves, that leaves a lot of holes in your organization and
Mm.
a lot of gaps to plug and fill, and it could get very, very chaotic. And of course, chaos is something Pakistan cricket is very well acquainted with.
Right, right.
um, Moving forward, I guess, what sort of traits would you want from your CEO, and what sort of a role would you think that a CEO should fulfill? Of course, Wasim Khan was very hands on, and you can credit him. A good chunk of credit goes to him for bringing cricket back to Pakistan, especially some of the more notable nations. He's done a lot of work with England, Australia, New Zealand, and the SENA countries, bringing them back to Pakistan. And what I'm basically trying to ask is that the role of a CEO, what do you think it should entail within the realms of the PCB?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think that the way that Wasim Khan was running, like I don't necessarily agree with his strategy or some of the things that he was doing, but I think that the way that the role existed when he was there was really good. I think that there was this kind of idea that Hassan Mani was kind of honorary chairman, very well respected. But really, Wasim, it was his ideas. He was the one who was kind of implementing things on the ground was the way to go. The way that I believe it should be done is kind of the way it's done here in the U.S. or even in Europe, or at least this is one management model, is that there should be maybe an honorary chairman, and then under that honorary chairman, there should be two kind of parallel organizations. I think there should be a president or a CEO of business operations whose job it is to run the business side of cricket in Pakistan, which is raising money through sponsorship, through ticketing, through all the various revenue streams, expanding revenue streams, and also kind of leading Pakistan cricket from a again from a business perspective. And then there should be kind of a almost like a chief cricket officer, right? Like another executive who is then responsible for cricket, right? What should Pakistan's domestic cricket schedule look like? What should Pakistan's selection structure look like? All those things should be under that person's purview, and he should get his or her budget from the business side, and then all overseen by a committee and a chairman, and kind of have those two kind of organizations running side by side. Because when the CEO is scheduling cricket tours, I think that's a terrible idea. Like, I think that's terrible because the job of a chief selector, which I think shouldn't exist in the first place, the job of someone who is running cricket from a chief selector perspective, their job is to build a great team, right? To build a team that can operate in all formats. Scheduling is a huge part of that. So I don't think that the chairman or the CEO or the president of business operations should necessarily be involved in that. I don't think that the selector should necessarily be involved in that, but I think that there should be another kind of person above that person that is kind of running the whole cricket strategy, right? And that should be separate from business. That is what I believe. I don't know what is the right way. I do think cricket is behind the times, and corporate governance is not an issue just in Pakistan. There's been a lot of corporate governance upheaval in Australia recently. There's been corporate governance upheaval in England. So these are kind of like the two blueprints that we like to use, right? Let's copy Australia, let's copy England. Are they doing it the right way? That they are doing some things the right way, but I wouldn't say that they're doing all things the right way. And I think that's why we should look outside. How are Fortune 500 companies structured? How are the best sporting organizations? Man City is a great example. Liverpool is a great example. The Golden State Warriors in the NBA is a great example. There are really great examples that we can follow throughout the world, and we need to broaden our horizons outside of cricket because cricket has done it one way for a long time, and cricket, I would say, is the least developed of all the major sports around the world.
Yeah, I'd have to agree over there as well. Of course, if you look at different sporting structures across the world, people have made a lot of progress and a lot of strides in the right direction. You mentioned that CEOs should not be scheduling cricket tours or the calendar for Pakistan cricket at all. What's your take on potentially having someone such as a managing director? Perhaps you know that Rob Key just got that role for England. Do you think that's a role maybe the PCB could incorporate to kind of make things better in terms of scheduling and looking after the players?
Right. So we've seen that, right? I think England's had that for a while, and that has to a certain extent worked. And it also depends on who you hire and how that person does their job, right? I believe was Ashley Giles in that role previously. I believe it was him, right? And so I
Yeah.
think a lot of people would say that maybe he didn't do a great job, and now Rob Key's in that role. So, having the structure in place is good. That's the first thing. But then now you have to hire the right people. You have to make sure that person is doing the job correctly. But I think, I definitely take your point on that. I think that is a good idea. I think that again, that should be separate from again the business side of running cricket.
Yeah, another glaring reality, or harrowing rather, is that there is no players' union in Pakistan. So they are basically at the behest of the PCB, and there is no bargaining table, and the players basically don't have a real say. And we've seen cricketers in Pakistan clash with the governance, and that hasn't always proven to be good for Pakistan cricket at all. So that's something I think that needs a look in, don't you think?
Well, I think labor protection in Pakistan doesn't exist, right? In general, right? Does labor have protection in Pakistan? They do not, right? They're not protected by anything. They're not protected by their employer, obviously. They're not protected by, the government. They're not protected by the judicial system. And obviously the same thing exists in Pakistan cricket. So like anywhere in the world, the PCB would never ever allow a players union because, that means more money going in the direction of the players. But in my opinion is that there should be a players union, and there should be more protection for players. Players should make more money. Players don't make enough money. Players don't have health insurance. I've asked this question to a lot of people in Pakistan, and I've never gotten an answer. I don't believe players have health insurance. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence of players going to the UK, spending their own money to get treatment. I know there's a better kind of a sports medicine structure now within the PCB than previously, but there should be a players union. Players should be protected a lot more. Players should have health insurance, and they should be fighting for these things. But again, the thing is that the system is such that we've seen how many players that we've seen over the years get alienated by the PCB, right? Players getting blackballed, right? Muhammad Yusuf, the last 4 or 5 years of his career were robbed because governance issues, right? Abdul Razak, the last 4 or 5 years of his career, completely robbed. Whether you like Amir or not, the fact is that he's still in international cricket. He's not playing international cricket, right? And so that happens because there's no protection for the players, right? And so a chairman comes in, a CEO comes in, a chief selector comes in, and they develop bad relations with a certain player, and that player is now gone. And part of the reason for that is that players, they don't have any single institution protecting them like a players union, and they don't make enough money as cricketers, right? So and because they don't make enough money, a lot of cricketers feel the need that they have to oblige the cricket board all the time because if they don't, they're going to lose a source of income. Nobody wants to lose a source of income, right? So there are some certain protections in place now, incidentally, like the PSL, right? Players make a lot of money from the PSL. Players are essentially contracted to have a certain salary that comes to them, but it's definitely not enough. If you look at the amount of money that the Pakistan cricketers make, I believe that I don't know if this number is accurate. Someone can disagree and they can post on Grassroots Cricket with an answer. But I believe that Babar Azam makes from the PCB. I believe he makes anywhere between $60,000 and $75,000, like his base salary. And I think the base salary in the top cricketing countries, let's not maybe compare it to India, is closer to high six figures in dollars. What is a compromise? I think that the basic salary structure should be, I don't know, $250,000 for the top cricketers in Pakistan, that they should be making that much money, irrespective of match fees. And so, why should players get more guaranteed money? Why shouldn't their salary be based on match fees? Because a player can get injured at any moment in time. His career can be over. A selector can come in tomorrow that doesn't like Babar Azam, for example, right? And he says, I'm getting rid of Babar Azam. What recourse does Babar Azam have? He's the best cricketer in Pakistan. What recourse does he have? What recourse does Rizwan have? Which is why they should be protected with higher salaries. Obviously, the PCB doesn't want to give players higher salaries, right? And on top of that, obviously they don't have health insurance, right? So they're not protected on either end. And so they may be making a lot of money when you compare it to the average Pakistani, but they also have shorter careers. We look at Babar. Babar is the best player in Pakistan. That Babar's going to play 20 years. That is like less than 1% of the players that are playing cricket in Pakistan that will have that 20-year career, that will have that financial security. The vast majority of them will not, which is why essentially contracted players should make more money. They should have higher salaries.
Yep, I agree. Going to go a bit left field and kind of think outside the box is a bit of a radical thought, and I'd love to have your opinion on it. What if the PCV is privatized? Do you see some potential benefits over there? Because when you privatize something and run it as a business, people will be more eager to make it successful. And then also, Pakistan loves its cricket. And
Yeah.
that's probably perhaps the one thing that unites this country most. And people, yeah, really rally behind Pakistan's cricketing cause. So, what do you think about that? Is that something that could potentially work?
So that's what I think should happen, right? So I think that the PCB should be kind of this like public-private partnership, right? Where all the cricket organizations, first of all, I don't really agree with the six cricket associations, but let's say you have the six cricket associations. I think they should be owned by private groups, and then they should then appoint or help appoint CEO, just like they do in the NBA, just like they do in the NFL, just like they do in Major League Baseball, and that's how it should work. So yeah, I agree with that. I think that's 100% how it should be. And they're not going to be private organizations like, like a private company. It's not going to be that way, right? Where a family owns, the PCBs. It should never be like that. But it should be, again, disconnected from the government, where it's under a sports minister or it's under the patron in chief. That shouldn't happen.
So you're looking at like these decentralized entities, maybe in the form of these provinces or whatever the structure is, and they should each be privately owned, and then that's how you basically funnel the system. Is that the thought?
Yeah, yeah, that's how it should be. And again, there's so many different ways to skin a cat, right? So you can have, non-executive directors. You can have all these different things to then ensure that there's, even within a, private organization, that there's protections for the PCB. And obviously the PCB is the governing board, right? They're regulating all of this. But yeah, that's how it should be. Yeah, honestly, that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see the PCB run like Major League Baseball, the NBA, or the NFL. What's the precedent for this, right? And I named some American organizations. When an organization is privatized, there is an incentive for those private owners to do really well, right? Right now, there's no incentive to do well. One small anecdote is, right, like the jerseys that we see teams have in Pakistan. If you look at the Qaid Azam Trophy, or if you look at some of the other tournaments that the PCB runs, look at the jerseys that the players wear, right? What is the quality of those jerseys? What is the design of those jerseys? What is the logo of the jerseys? Not that great, right? They're really poorly contrived. And then you look at the PSL, and you can disagree with a specific design or a specific logo, but generally speaking, they're all pretty cool, right? The production is really cool. And why is that? It is that way because Salman Iqbal is incentivized to have a really cool logo and a really cool jersey. The same with Ali Naqvi at Islamabad United. The same with the Ranas in Lahore. They're incentivized to build brands. The cricket associations are not necessarily, they are kind of incentivized to do that now, but historically they've not been, right? And the fact that they don't really make a lot of money from, or they don't make any money, it's almost like CSR, right? They're not really making any money from domestic cricket. So that's why I think it should be privatized, because once you privatize something, those individuals now have to invest to make money, right? And that's missing in the current structure.
Yep, 100%. I too think that that is something that could work. Of course, the PSL does come to mind. You stated the PSL as an example, but then you're looking at franchise cricket, right? You're with those players for a month, and the rest of the year, sure, you can build some strategies around what sort of team composition you want and who you want to sign and who you want to retain. That stuff keeps going. But when you are in charge of an entire department or province, let's suppose Central Punjab, someone buys out that team. Now you're looking at the whole domestic season, something that does not bring in a lot of money. I do agree that if they privatize it, you have more opportunity to create more revenue and make more profits. But of course, it is a big risk given, 4-day cricket doesn't really have an audience. Now we see that, people tune into the Qaid Azam Trophy, but that too has historically been something that department cricket has basically dominated. And maybe you could think that since we already had departments in Pakistan cricket, and there's been a lot of talk about how they should have never moved towards this six team structure, maybe you could somehow incorporate them with these regions and kind of use their expertise that they had throughout all of those years and basically come up with some sort of a hybrid solution that could improve Pakistan's domestic cricket, because the PSL, only a limited amount of players get to play that. And also, it's dominated by Pakistan's own star cricketers and foreign players. In the domestic circuit, you need to pump in the money so that people can be more comfortable choosing cricket as a career. And that's something that is a massive, massive issue in
Yeah.
Pakistan. So, in terms of that, do you think that maybe, you bring in PIA and call it the PIA Central Punjab or the Habib Bank KPK, something like that?
I don't think the department should be connected with cricket or any sport. I think the department should come on as sponsors. Those are
Mhm.
corporations, right? Corporations should come out and sponsors and behave like sponsors. Maybe they could have seats on those boards, but they should not have any kind of active responsibility. The idea, for example, that PIA KPK is something that I would root for. I would not care about it, not even for 1 second. What should happen, and I think the PCB is at a crossroads right now, where the kind of essentially PSL franchises are leased. Those leases are going to come up once we get closer to year 10. What should happen is that Pakistan cricket is not interlinked, right? Domestic cricket, international cricket, these are all different ecosystems, right? It's like chaos. What should happen is that PSL franchises, as part of their investment in the PSL, should also be mandated to buy each province, right? So the Karachi Kings should own Sindh Cricket or should be investors in Sindh Cricket, and Sindh should be rebranded as Karachi Kings or whatever. And what would happen is those brands now would exist 12 months a year as opposed to 1 month a year. Those organizations would get better because they would be incentivized to. For example, the owner of Karachi Kings, for example, Salman Iqbal, you're never going to make money from 4-day cricket, but you could make money from the domestic T20 competition. You can make money from the domestic 1-day competition, and you could even make money from 4-day cricket. You're just not going to get fans in the stadium. But the only way that that would work is that if Karachi Kings was a brand that existed for 12 months. Now those PSL brands are stronger too. The PSL
Mhm.
has more money coming in. Sponsors have more reason to invest in those companies because they're going to have forward-facing branding for 12 months a year, right? Newspapers are going to be talking about it. Sports shows will be talking about it for 12 months out of the year. And so that's what I think should happen, right? But the first thing is that I'll use the Urdu word. There's no wujud of Sindh, KPK, Southern Punjab in the vernacular of Pakistan, right? We do not, I believe, Behram, you're from Islamabad. I'm from Karachi.
Mhm.
I never talk about the fact that I'm from Sindh. That's not to say that Karachi is not in Sindh. It's just that I never associate myself with Sindh. I don't think people from Central Punjab, like who associates themselves with Central
Mhm.
Punjab or Northern, right? No one does, right? We
Absolutely.
associate ourselves from being from Islamabad, from Pindi, from Faisalabad, from Sialkot, from Peshawar, etc., etc. So that the first thing is that should change, and that's why the PSL is such a success. The city-based idea, and that's how the associations should work. There should be a Karachi Cricket Association, essentially run by by maybe three structures, right? Where you have the Karachi Kings, which are your investor. Maybe you have another local sponsor. Maybe you have someone from an election, and so you have local representation from within Karachi, and you have kind of this like three-headed board that runs cricket, and you can expand that, right? You can grow that. Right now we have, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but Rawalpindi is a really big hub of cricket in Pakistan. Sialkot is a really big hub of cricket in Pakistan. Faisalabad, Hyderabad. These are big cities, right? These are big cities that can be monetized. They're not because once you put that banner of Sindh, KPK, Southern Punjab, Bahawalpur is another one. The average fan is not going to care about these things. They never will. They never will, right? So it'll never become a marketable product, which is why I think that the PSL franchises should be mandated to invest, and then those organizations will be incentivized to build cricket in a much more sophisticated manner than it is currently.
Yeah, that is a fantastic thought. And maybe, hopefully, someone from the PCB is listening to this podcast and picks up on some of those ideas. And of course, we all do agree that things definitely need to change with respect to the way the PCB runs, is governed, the way the hierarchy exists, and the lack of separation of duties, just everything pretty much that we discussed in this podcast. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you, Ali. Thank you so much for joining and sharing your wonderful thoughts. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed yourself as well.
Yeah, no, it's fun. I obviously love talking about cricket, and hopefully we can kind of continue, on this path. Hopefully this was not just educational, but fun. People who like to talk about and think about cricket, and yeah, always nice to talk about cricket with another cricket aficionado like yourself.
Absolutely. And those feelings are mutual. Of course, guys, if you enjoyed this podcast, give it a like, give it a share, make your friends listen to it, and let us know. Give us your feedback of how we can improve. That'll be all for episode 1. We'll catch you with episode 2 and another very exciting topic. That's all for today. Goodbye.
Shot, not get over again.